Hello, friends. It is time for part 3. So, this is Love by the Twisted Tales series. I apologize, it's taken a little bit to get back in here, but what I'm going to go ahead and do, since it has been a hot minute, I'm going to recap on a couple of pages on part 2 where we left off to kind of do a little refresh. And this was when Cinderella was outside and she saw the prince coming her way. So, we're just going to jump right in here. Prince Charles was nearly at the end of the corridor when he suddenly stopped. He turned and retraced his steps until he stood in front of her, and Cinderella held her breath, her pulse hammering in her ears. He smiled at her, and something flickered across his dark eyes, a spark of recognition. Cinderella's heart lifted. "You," he said quietly. He gestured at her lavender sash. "You must be Aunt Genevieve's new attendant." Cinderella blinked. Sure, she had misheard, but the prince kept speaking. "Welcome. My aunt is very dear to me, and I would be most grateful if you saw to it that she is comfortable here." Cinderella's lips parted with disappointment. Struggling to find the words, she curtsied again. Before she could utter anything at all, Prince Charles wished her well and was gone. "Yes, your highness," she whispered, watching him disappear down the hall. Slowly, as her heart sank, a terrible ache rose in her throat. She had been sure he would recognize her. Was it the wig? Why didn't I take it off? Why didn't I say anything? She inhaled, trying to ease away the sadness swelling inside her. Even with the wig, she thought he would have known her. Maybe it hadn't been love after all. Maybe he was only searching for her because his father wanted him to get married. What does it matter? She admonished herself. This is the chance of happiness I've always wanted. I'm free of my stepmother and I have a new life in the palace. It'd be silly to risk losing that new life and throw my heart away on a boy, prince or not, that I don't even know. I'm not going to look for him again, she decided, pushing all thoughts of Prince Charles aside. She needed her work as the Duchess's attendant more than she needed a prince. She'd pour all her energy toward her position in the palace. Then she'd make new dreams for herself, dreams like seeing more of the world and helping others, like her fairy godmother. She frowned, murmuring to herself, "The next time I see her, I'll have to ask what she meant by her magic being forbidden here." But she had no idea when she saw Lenore again, she couldn't summon her fairy godmother while she was working in the palace. Not after what she had said, or hadn't said, about the ban of magic. Certainly not with the Grand Duke constantly lurking about, waiting on her for reports. His portrait stared at Cinderella from the wall, and a wave of dread rushed over her. In her first hour serving Duchess Genevieve, she'd done nothing but help the king's sister dress for lunch. What exactly was the Duke expecting her to report to him? What her fashion tastes were? What her flavored tea she liked to drink? Cinderella hoped she wouldn't have to find out. Chapter 10. This is where part 3 will start. Prince Charles wished he had something or someone to blame for being late to lunch. Under his breath, he ran through a list of excuses, each more pitiful than the last. "Apologies, Aunt Genevieve. My horse stumbled over a fence during my morning ride. It's my fault. I was distracted." "Apologies, Aunt Genevieve. I was so engrossed in the book I'm reading I didn't hear the clock strike noon. What book is it?" I can't recall the title." He shook his head, trying again. "Apologies, Aunt Genevieve. I wandered too far from the palace and got lost. Where was I, you say?" "In the gardens. I wanted to see whether the roses had bloomed." He shook his head at himself. "Got lost? On the palace grounds, where you spent every free moment of your childhood exploring, where there are at least 5 guards watching you at all times." None of his excuses were true, but worse, they weren't even good lies, and he knew it. Passing his horse's reins to the stable hand, he returned to the palace and made for the royal dining hall, where his aunt and father awaited. In all honesty, he had been well aware of the time. He'd ridden out to the edge of the palace grounds to a quiet part of the hill overlooking the city. Instead of heading back early so his valet could help him change out of his riding habit, he'd stayed out until the last minute, breathing in the fresh spring air and gazing down at the vast expanse of Valours. valors. Even after 4 years away, he still knew the bend of every path and the shape of each grove across the royal grounds. How good it had felt to be out of the palace, away from the perfumed halls and the watchful eyes of his ancestors' towering portraits, and from the responsibility that weighed on his shoulders. How good it felt to try to forget, even if only for a moment, that the lofty trees and clipped hedges surrounding the palace perimeter were walls designed to keep him in and everyone else out. Only half mindful of his whereabouts, he soon found himself a mere turn away from the royal dining room. Its cream-painted doors, adorned with gilded angels and olive branches, were slightly parted. Charles could just make out his father's throaty voice inside, and his aunt's. He'd better hurry if he didn't want to disappoint Aunt Genevieve. As he quickened his pace, a young woman to his left curtsied, a servant he'd never seen. She wore a lavender sash with a wig slightly too large for her head. Her eyes were the clearest shade of blue he'd ever seen. He stopped to greet her. He'd always made an effort to welcome the newer staff, but his words were hasty and rushed. He didn't want to keep Aunt Genevieve waiting. Yet, as soon as he continued on his way, he regretted not having spoken longer to the new girl. There was something about her. The blueness of her eyes had arrested him in his place. A hint of sadness had touched them when he'd spoken, and he wondered why. Part of him wished he could go back to her and make her smile. A mad possibility entered his mind. It made no sense at all, yet he couldn't get it out of his head. She looked so familiar. No, it couldn't be her. It had to be the sash, he reasoned. He hadn't seen any of the servants wear lavender, his aunt's color, in a long time. Yes, that was it. His mind made up, he made for the hidden panel in the wall where the servants entered and exited the royal dining room. The first person he encountered was just the one he was looking for. Madame Erminia, I was hoping you could help me with something. But of course, Your Highness, she beamed. Thank you, Charles cleared his throat. The new girl serving my aunt, he began. Not at all what he was trying to get out of the conversation, but unable to stop himself from asking. What's her name? The new girl? Madame Ermina tilted her head. I do not know who you mean, Your Highness. She reminds me of someone. The prince shook his head. Never mind, it's... Oh, you mean Louisa's Stretch Urchin. Yes, she was assigned to your aunt this morning. Ah. Hearing his voice brighten, he cleared his throat self-consciously. I believe so. But what do you mean, street urchin? Madame Ermina's composure wavered, and she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. A slip of the tongue, Your Highness. My niece brought the girl in this morning. She had nowhere else to go. This morning, Charles repeated. So she only just arrived? Yes, just. Sounds like she's an orphan, poor thing. He sighed. An orphan with nowhere else to go. His father and the Duke were convinced his mystery maiden was of noble birth, but her giddiness and the earnest way she'd spoken to him were anything like the ladies at court he'd met. Still, common sense dictated that no penniless orphan could be the young lady he danced with, a girl with glass slippers and pale blue gown that shone like moonlight. But those eyes... He couldn't shake the feeling that he'd seen them somewhere before. Thank you for your help. Madame Ermina curtsied. It is my pleasure, Your Highness. I haven't had a chance to tell you this personally until now, but everyone in the household is so happy to have you home from your studies, and I have looked forward to returning, replied Charles. He gave a slight, grateful bow of his head. Now, if you'll excuse me. It wasn't a lie, not entirely. He had been looking forward to returning to the palace and seeing his father, but was he happy to be back? Of that, he wasn't quite so sure. 4 years at the Royal University of Airlays had changed him. He lived in a dormitory instead of a palace, and his professors had called him by his name instead of his title. His classmates whispered behind his back, turning up their noses at him for sending away his valet and for staying in the university dormitory instead of one of his father's nearby estates. But he'd never minded. He relished not being reminded of his royal status at every turn. The girl at the ball was the first person he had ever met who seemed to want to get to know him for him. Not because he was the crown prince of Arules. She had no idea he was the prince, and Charles could not forget how refreshing that was, how wonderful it had been to simply talk to her. She hadn't cared about his title, and he wouldn't care about hers. Whatever, whoever she was, he was utterly smitten all the same. But she had vanished, and with each passing day Charles despaired that he would never see her again. "The young lady has left without a trace," the Grand Duke had reported on the night of the ball, after sending his men to chase after her coach. Then, after a snide pause, in which he had taken undisguised pleasure, he had added, "Don't you suppose that if she wanted to marry His Royal Highness, she would have stayed?" Charles couldn't get Ferdinand's words out of his head. What if they were true? He wanted to believe that she had fled the ball because it had been midnight, and as she had said. But what if she had left because of him? The doors to the royal dining room opened, and a familiar voice from inside called to him, "Charles!" Lifting his head, Prince Charles smiled, filled with a new sense of hope and determination. If anyone could help him find the girl of his dreams, it was Aunt Genevieve. Chapter 11. Try as she might, Cinderella could not forget her second encounter with Prince Charles. Every free moment she had, she ran through their brief conversation in her head. She couldn't forget how her heart had swelled when he stopped to speak with her, and how it sank once she realized he hadn't recognized her at all. It still stung whenever she thought of it. "You have your answer," she told herself. "He doesn't remember you, so you should stop thinking about him." Easier said than done. The only way that would happen was if she didn't have any free moments to think about him. She threw herself into her new routine as the Duchess's attendant, working from dawn until long past dusk over the next week. Being a royal attendant was taxing. Cinderella had thought that serving only one mistress instead of 3 would be easier, but the palace was far bigger than her stepmother's house. The walk alone from the kitchen to the Duchess's chamber with her tea took a quarter of an hour. Not to mention, Genevieve was a demanding mistress with a keen eye, and a few things pleased her. "My collar is crooked," she would say. Then a minute later, "My hair is uneven. You'll have to do it again." Or, "The rouge on my left cheek is darker than on the right. Can't you do anything properly?" And before breakfast, "I specifically asked for my tea to be steeped 4 minutes, not 3, not 5, 4. Any more mistakes, it's much too strong." On top of that, Cinderella was tasked with helping the Duchess prepare her bath, taking her clothes to be laundered, steaming the curtains, beating dust out of the rugs, and polishing the Duchess's jewels until they sparkled. Duchess Genevieve was used to having at least 3 girls to wait on her, but no other servants arrived to Cinderella's aid. All the same, Cinderella didn't mind. Duchess Genevieve was stern and eccentric, and as often as she berated Cinderella for her incompetence, she wasn't mean-spirited, as Lady Tremaine had been. Maybe it was the portrait Cinderella had seen in the royal gallery of the... the royal gallery of the Duchess grinning, or the way she pored over her novels, chuckling to herself when she thought Cinderella couldn't hear. That made Cinderella like the woman. Her stepmother had never read. In fact, every time she caught Cinderella in the act, she tore the book away from her and burned it. In the palace, Cinderella had already stolen a few peeks at Duchess Genevieve's novels, luxuriating for a few moments in a far-off adventure. Cinderella was certain that no one who had read such thrilling tales could be that bad. Besides, the extra work made the days pass faster. Every day she survived in the palace meant another night with a roof over her head and 3 hot meals, the leftovers of which she and Louisa always sneaked over to Bruno late at night. But it didn't help that she was living under the same roof as the prince. The prince, Cinderella thought with a sigh, as she slid a pearl-studded pin into the Duchess's chignon to hold it in form. I don't even know why I'm still thinking about him. Maybe I'm in love with the idea of him, just as he's in love with the idea of me. So much that he didn't even recognize the real me. "You're looking rather dour today," the Duchess remarked while Cinderella finished buttoning the back of her dress. "What's the matter?" "Nothing, ma'am," Cinderella mumbled. "Then, for heaven's sake, girl, can't you say anything entertaining? The lot of you are so dull." Genevieve sighed and reached for a book on her dresser. I am beginning to remember why I stayed away from this place for so many years. This is the capital of Inui. Would your highness like me to fetch you some embroidery? I have a friend who works in the sewing room, and she could bring something. Embroidery? Genevieve looked up from her book. Goodness, no. What do you take me for, my mother? Scowling, she fluttered her hands westward. Fetch me something new from the library. No, make it 2. Make sure they're not adventures, with pirates and beheadings in the lot. Cinderella resisted the urge to raise an eyebrow. Yes, your highness. Is that old prig Martin? If that old prig Martin is there, let him know it's for grinning Jenny. In spite of her efforts to remain deadpan, the Duchess disclosed the barest of smiles. She quickly repositioned her lips into a thin, stirred line. He should know what I'm looking for. Grinning Jenny. Yes, your highness. What are you standing there for? Don't make me regret keeping you on. Cinderella hurried out of the Duchess's apartment. On her way to the library, she took a few wrong turns and ended up in the middle of Blooms and Looms. She decided there was no harm in quickly checking on Bruno while she was there. She and Louisa had found a hiding spot for him behind the hen house, and they had been taking turns sneaking him snacks from the kitchen. Cinderella only hoped Bruno had behaved himself and hadn't become tempted to chase the... I found this mutt hunting the chickens, Ermina said, dragging a regretful-looking brown bloodhound into the servants' quarters. Bruno whimpered. A thick leather leash knotted around his neck. He's mine, Cinderella exclaimed, racing to him. Yours, blustered Madame Ermina, tightening her grip on Bruno's leash. Why am I not surprised? Fear spiked in Cinderella's heart. Please, she pleaded. He's a good dog. He has no place to go. There are no pets allowed in the palace. Either he goes or you both go. Oh, please, said Cinderella. Bruno's been with me since I was a little girl, and he... Ermina's jaw tensed. Need I repeat myself? Cinderella was about to plead her case again when a sharp voice from behind interrupted. What is going on here? Instantly recognizing the speaker, Cinderella fell into a curtsy. Your Highness, Ermina spluttered, startled by the Duchess's unexpected appearance. Behind her, Bruno growled and nipped at the hem of her dress. Ermina kicked him back, locking him into one of the pantries behind her. She cleared her throat, her tone becoming honeyed and warm. What an honor it is to welcome you here. My deepest apologies. I was not expecting you. Genevieve harumphed. And why should you? I do not make a habit of having my comings and goings announced. To what do we owe the pleasure of your visit, Duchess? Asked Ermina, wisely changing the subject. I was wondering what was taking so long with my book. Imagine my displeasure when the guards informed me they spotted my attendant here instead of in the royal library. A smug sniffle escaped from Madame Ermina's direction, and Cinderella tried not to panic. I apologize, Your Highness. I'll see it to it that the girl's dismissed. Cut in Madame Ermina, starting to shoo Cinderella away. Come with me, you and your mutt, before you embarrass us. No, please, Cinderella twisted away, untangling her arm from Madame Ermina's grip. She freed Bruno from the pantry, and as he spun toward the door, the Duchess stepped on his leash. Halt, she commanded, and to Cinderella's surprise, Bruno stopped. Now explain yourself. Flustered, Cinderella saw she had no choice but to tell the truth. I wanted to check on Bruno, my dog. You see, we're both new here, and he had nowhere to go. So... Animals are not permitted in the palace, Madame Ermina interrupted, reaching for Cinderella's arm again. I must apologize for disturbing you, Your Highness. I'll see to it that she leaves the palace. Straighta, I'll take him, interrupted the Duchess. Stunned, Madame Ermina blinked. Pardon, Duchess? I said I will take him. The mutt, the dog, Boris, whatever it is his name is. Genevieve glared at the maids eavesdropping on the scene, and everyone hastily returned to work. Untie that ridiculous cord from his neck. Yes, Your Highness. Thank you for reminding me why I prefer the company of animals to the lot of you. Servants, lords, kings, you're all the same. Squabbling ninnies. Come, Bruno. Genevieve gestured at the bloodhound and then fluttered a beringed hand at Cinderella. And you, girl, get to the library and bring me my book. Chop, chop. Yes, Your Highness, Cinderella breathed. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. It's only out of boredom that I decided to save your mutt. My brother and nephew are hardly good company when all they've been doing is moping about. Cinderella hoped the Duchess didn't see her flinch. Moping about? Now why are you still standing there? While you're at it, I want a fresh cup of tea. Remember, 2 lumps of sugar and a splash of milk. Genevieve turned to Bruno. And you are the skinniest dog I've ever seen. She clapped her hands and the next directed her severe tone at Madame Ermina. You, see it to that Bruno has a bountiful meal. I want to see some meat on his bones. Madame Ermina hurried to fulfill the request. I'll fatten you up, you scraggly beast, the Duchess murmured to Bruno. She wrinkled a nose, picking a chicken feather out of his coat. And I'll see to it that you're bathed, too. Hiding a smile, Cinderella turned for the library to procure a book as the Duchess had requested. If Genevieve had a soft spot for dogs, she couldn't be as irredeemable as everyone said. A half-hour later, Cinderella returned to Duchess Genevieve's chambers, out of breath but with an armful of novels that the librarian had eagerly recommended. Her mind was reeling. While walking back, she'd secretly flipped through the top of the book and unable to help herself. It was titled The Pirates of Isle Whitey and the Enchanted Forest. The word enchanted had caught her eye. Before she had met her fairy godmother, she thought magic and spells and curses were long gone, now only existent in tales meant for small children or novels such as these. But it seemed there was more to it than that. As she absently glanced through the pages, she noticed one that was dog-eared. It wouldn't do for the Duchess to read a book with bent pages. Cinderella turned to it, only to be confronted with handwritten message. We must bring magic back. Maybe 36 ships and 47 pirates can help. Art. The rest of the message had been smudged. It made no sense at all. Cinderella stopped. What could it mean, and who had written it there? There was no other message in the book, nor in any of the others Cinderella had borrowed. Before she had a chance to investigate further, Genevieve appeared. Hand those here, she said, taking the books. The Duchess barely glanced at them. She pushed them to the side of her desk and collapsed onto the brocade day bed in her parlor. What is wrong with this dog? She demanded. Hastily setting aside the book, Cinderella asked, What do you mean, Your Highness? I bring him here, out of the gutters, into one of the grandest apartments in the palace, but all he does is stare mournfully at the door. I do not understand him at all. Where is he now? As soon as Cinderella asked, Bruno started scratching against the bedroom door. Genevieve opened it, and he practically leapt into Cinderella's arms. Forgetting her present company, Cinderella embraced him, stroking his fur and tickling his ears. The Duchess was watching them with a stern expression. Quickly rising again, Cinderella nudged Bruno towards the Duchess. Genevieve rubbed one of his floppy ears, and after his hesitation eased, Bruno luxuriated in the attention. She drew back her hand. When was the last time he had a bath? Before Cinderella could reply, the Duchess fluttered her fingers at her. No, don't tell me. I'd rather not know. I don't see any fleas, thankfully. See to it that he is washed tonight. Yes, ma'am. Duchess Genevieve sighed, petting Bruno again. You know, it's been a long time since I've had a dog. I didn't expect to find this mongrel so delightful, and yet he grows on you quite unexpectedly. It wasn't the first time a smile had graced the Duchess's lips, but as before, her expression quickly became stern once again. How did this creature come to you? My father and I found him on the street outside our home, Cinderella said. I was 9, and my mother had just passed away. Her throat tightened. He looked lonely like my papa and me, so we took him in. Sometimes I wish George would get a dog, Genevieve said with a harumph, though I guess he's got a pack of other animals nipping at his feet. Excuse me, ma'am? Oh, all the gentry and the lords on the council, the Grand Duke especially, but a real dog would do him good. It would do Charles good, too. Cinderella inhaled at the mention of the prince. Why is that? His mother died when he was a young boy, too, of course, mused the Duchess. She cleared her throat as if suddenly aware she was sharing too much. And why the name Bruno? My papa picked it. He said it meant brown, like his coat, but also protector. We didn't mean to keep him at first, but he came to us looking so starved and sad that we took him in. And once he'd been fed, Papa and I couldn't part with him." Cinderella smiled at Bruno. "He's been my sweetest companion ever since, and my most loyal protector." "I like dogs much more than people," said the Duchess. "For that reason, they don't let you down as much," she sniffed. "I have 6 children, you know, but my husband died 3 years ago. He was a good practical man, one who never grew up with a golden spoon in his mouth or with a crown dangling over his head. My children, on the other hand," she shuddered. "When Arthur died, he left the estate to me instead of our eldest son. Unheard of! My children love me, but they rarely visit anymore. They say I embarrass them by throwing away our wealth to charity and hobnobbing with poor intellectuals. So you see, even though I'm always surrounded by people, it is rather lonely sometimes." Cinderella understood more than she could express. Her heart opened up to the Duchess, and she began to wonder why the Duke disliked her so much. "Then why don't you visit more?" "Visit George?" Genevieve's shoulders shook with mirth, but her expression grew quickly somber. "Perhaps I should have. Charles has been away at school, and I suppose I never forgave George for casting Arthur away from court. I can hold grudges for years, you see, and I left with a promise to never return." "A promise to never return?" Cinderella bit her lip to contain her curiosity. What did that mean? "But now, here I am, back in the palace." Genevieve cleared her throat. "Tell me, what does your father do?" "My father passed away a long time ago," Cinderella said softly. "I see. You must miss your parents terribly." "Every day," confessed Cinderella, swallowing the lump in her throat. It had been so long since she'd permitted herself to mourn her parents. While she had lived with her stepmother, Lady Tremaine kept her so busy that she hadn't had much time to think about her father or her mother, but now she missed them more than ever. "I don't remember my mother well," Cinderella began, "but she used to sing a lullaby about a nightingale every night." "Did your father remarry?" "Yes," said Cinderella carefully. "My stepmother has 2 daughters." "Ah, therein lies the problem. You fell into the shadows, didn't you?" Cinderella barely nodded. "Poor Charles," Genevieve muttered. "He's been alone a long time, too." "Alone?" "My brother didn't spend much time with him. He hopes to rectify that, I think." "How?" The softness in Genevieve's expression immediately hardened as she realized she'd revealed something she should not have. "I'm sorry, Your Highness. I shouldn't have." "Can you keep a secret?" Genevieve interrupted softly. Cinderella blinked back her surprise. "Yes." "He's not a young man, my brother. He is tired of ruling and plans to pass on the throne." To the prince? "Charles doesn't know it yet, but that's why George is so adamant that he find a wife and start a family, so that the succession will be secure, and none of our neighboring kingdoms will sense any weakness." Cinderella remained quiet. She didn't know what to say. "That's why George asked me to come. Oh, he says it's to help Charles and his future bride settle into their new roles as king and queen, but I think he's finally feeling guilty about what he did to my husband. He'll never apologize for it, though. He's proud, just like me." Again, Cinderella's interest piqued. What happened between the Duke of Orleans and the king, she wondered. No one knows this yet, not Charles or the Grand Duke. "It is of the utmost importance that it remains this way until my brother is ready. Though I have a feeling Ferdinand suspects something, given my return to the palace." Cinderella winced, remembering the Duke had asked her to collect information on the Duchess. Now she wished Genevieve hadn't told her anything. "What makes you think he suspects something?" "Ferdinand's a sly old fox. Always has been. Why else do you think he plastered himself next to the king as his most trusted advisor for all these years? George has always been a child at heart, and Ferdinand's taken advantage of him to increase his influence. I can't stand the man." "Why are you telling me this?" The Duchess picked up her fan and batted it carelessly. "I'm good at reading people. I only wish my brother were, too. Let's just say you've got an honest way about you, and a sharper eye than I initially thought." She brushed her fingers over the nearest table. "Not a speck of dust." "Oh," Cinderella felt like little pride from the compliment. "It is my job," was all she said. I'm glad you understand that, girl, though no one told you to reorganize my books. There was a note of accusation in the Duchess' voice, and Cinderella didn't know how to respond. I apologize, ma'am. Most of my attendants arranged them like flowers, by color and size, but you did it by substance and author. You couldn't have done that without reading them. She swallowed. I didn't have time to read any, ma'am, but I couldn't resist skimming a few. Which ones? The Pirate's Adventure? Never mind, don't tell me. There's a library in the palace for good reason, you know. I'm so sorry. They're books, not diaries, girl. I'll tell you when you've committed a crime. The girl before you, I caught reading my letters. I fired her on the spot. So far, you've passed the test. Duchess Genevieve paused. Speaking of which, what is your name? The past few days, the Duchess had only called her girl. Now that she'd finally asked her name, Cinderella became tongue-tied. It's Cinderella. Cinderella, repeated Genevieve. An odd name, but you must be aware of that. She sniffed, stifling a yawn. Heavens, it's 4 o'clock already. I've been dawdling so long with you and your mud I've forgotten my afternoon nap. All this traveling has made it impossible for me to sleep. Over there on my writing desk, bring me my sleeping draught. Obediently, Cinderella grasped the glass bottle and followed the Duchess's instructions. 3 drops into my tea and a squeeze of lemon for good measure. No, child, that's 4 drops. Can't you count? I'm terribly sorry, Your Highness. I suppose 1 extra drop won't kill me, said Genevieve, bringing the teacup to her lips. She sipped, and almost instantly her hooded eyelids drooped with drowsiness. I don't know how George drinks this stuff every night. She finished the tea, then passed the cup to Cinderella. Now off with you. It's time for my afternoon nap. Be back precisely in an hour, you hear. I'll expect a fresh pot of tea and some biscuits would do nicely as well. And Cinder Girl, if you ever do go to the library, tell those overstuffed scholars there that the books you're looking for are for me. Fewer questions that way. Yes, Your Highness, thank you. Cinderella took one of the silver trays from the Duchess's table, set the empty teapot on it, and slipped out of the apartments. No sooner did she step outside, though, than the Duke's attendant bumped into her. Oh, I'm sorry, she said, but the man had whirled away from view. When she looked down on her tray, there was a sealed letter that hadn't been there before. Heart hammering, she waited until she was down the corridor, away from the guard's inquisitive eyes, before opening and reading the note. I await your report. Come see me at once. Chapter 12. Cinderella dreaded meeting the Grand Duke again, and her apprehension only intensified when she arrived at his apartments. She'd simply evade his questions as best as she could. That was all there was to it. He hadn't been in his office by the servants' quarters, so the palace staff had directed her to his apartments. They were even larger than the Duchess's, and room after room smelled of burnt wax and worn leather. She followed the smell past the sitting room into a short hallway, whose walls were mounted with portraits of the Duke's forebears. At the end, a door had been left slightly ajar, the frantic scraping of a pen to paper growing louder as Cinderella approached. Buried behind a stack of papers and a cup of tea that looked barely touched, the Grand Duke scribbled away at the sheet of paper, his back hunched as his neck bent toward the sunlight that pulled on his desk. His black hair, which had been neatly slicked back the last time she saw him, spilled across his forehead, and his mustache curled at its ends. Quietly, Cinderella slid into the office, her steps muffled by the wool carpet. She shuffled off onto the parquet. The Duke didn't look up. The minutes stretched, and finally she cleared her throat. Your Grace, you summoned me. His fountain pen rattled against the inkpot. Ah, it's you. He held a red stick of wax against the lone candle burning on his desk, then affixed a seal to his document before putting it aside. At last, you must be brimming with news, my child. Come, what is your report? 2 key pieces of information clung to Cinderella's mind, but she remembered what the Duchess had told her about the Grand Duke Ferdinand, that behind his sterling reputation was a sly old fox, a man not to be trusted. She pursed her lips. I'm not sure what to report, Your Grace. Not sure? The Grand Duke eyed her skeptically. You've had days to observe the Duchess. I told you I wanted to hear everything. She takes her tea 3 times a day, steeped for 4 minutes. I don't care about her tea-drinking habits. Forgive me, Grace. You've never told me exactly what you do care about. He seethed at her. Need I remind you that I gave you this position? I could easily take it away. I apologize, Your Grace, she said quickly, fervently hoping to be released from this meeting as soon as possible. There is nothing unusual about the Duchess? He asked impatiently. What does she do during all her time? Write letters, go on long walks? She reads, Your Grace. Reads what? Novels, mostly pirate adventures. The Duke let out a snort. A front. Come now, there's more. You're twisting your hands. Cinderella's hands flew apart. She hadn't even noticed. You have learned something from the Duchess, something valuable. Out with it, my child. I haven't all day. I think of something, Cinderella urged herself. Anything. But all she could think of was the truth. The king was planning to abdicate. The Duke inhaled in frustration before softening his tone. Come, my dear. It's all right. Sit down, sit down. I've frightened you, haven't I? He ushered her toward one of the plush chairs across from his desk, but Cinderella remained standing. You can tell me, do you not care about the kingdom? It is my duty to see to it that our country remains strong and safe. The king's sister spends a great deal of time lobbying with the common folk and arguing against laws that the council has passed to secure the future of our people. If she has shared something with you, it is your duty to tell me. It is your duty to Arules. He said it so convincingly that Cinderella nearly believed him. Nearly. Thank you, Your Grace, she stammered. But all the Duchess and I talk about are tea, my dog Bruno, and what book she liked from the library. Following a long exhale, the Grand Duke folded his hands over his lap. Is something troubling Her Highness? A physician was seen leaving the chambers yesterday. Cinderella tilted her head. I don't know. I didn't see him. I asked only out of concern, Ferdinand pressed. Is something amiss with her health? The question seemed innocent enough. Oh, no, she's fine, Cinderella responded. But she has had some trouble sleeping. She takes a sleeping draught. The Duke leaned forward with interest. Come again? A sleeping draught, Cinderella repeated. More hastily, she added, every afternoon after lunch with the king is the same one His Majesty takes himself. No wonder he no longer takes tea with me, the Grand Duke muttered, stroking his chin. Interesting. It seemed like a common enough thing for a woman the Duchess's age to do, and the king. She didn't know why it interested the Duke so much. You needn't look so frightened, Cinderella. The Duchess is a powerful woman, yes, but she has had a turbulent past, and I would not be surprised if she harbored deep resentment toward her brother, and toward me and my late father. But why? There was an incident, you see. The Duke frowned as if he remembered something that tasted sour. There was an incident revolving around the Duchess that endangered the kingdom, and it is my duty to see nothing like it ever happens again. Genevieve is not to be trusted. Understood? Yes, Your Grace. Very good, he said. You've done well, Cinderella. Very well. If you learn anything else of note, come find me at once. You are dismissed. Not needing to be told twice, Cinderella left the room, breathing a sigh of relief once she was alone. What an odd man, she thought. For the life of her, she couldn't imagine why he had looked so surprised to find out the Duchess took a sleeping draught. At least it was better than his knowing the real truth, that King George was planning to pass the throne to his son, or that she was the mysterious princess everyone was searching for. The Duchess was already awake when Cinderella arrived to draw the curtains and help the lady out of bed. Forgetting her place and entirely too aware of the Grand Duke's interrogation, Cinderella asked, Are you feeling well, Your Highness? Now there is an impertinent question, huffed Genevieve. Didn't you learn it was improper to ask a lady about what ails her? My apologies, Your Highness, but I was hoping I might be able to help you. Ha! There's nothing you could do to help me with, Genevieve said, stirring the sugar into her tea. Why can't I help you? Ha! There's nothing you could help me with, Genevieve said, stirring the sugar into her tea. Why can't you sleep? Asked Cinderella, concerned. Nightmares? The Duchess scoffed. You truly wish to know? Yes. Well, if it isn't any of your business, girl. End of discussion. Startled by the Duchess's sharp tone, Cinderella bowed her head to show she understood. I'll be taking supper with my brother today. Be sure to have an extra pot of tea prepared for when I return, with a plate of shortbread. I'll need extra nourishment for tomorrow morning. Charles suggested the most ghastly hour for the tour of the kingdom. Cinderella's heart skipped a beat. Prince Charles? Do I have any other nephews named Charles I'm not aware of? The Duchess wrapped the shawl over her shoulders and reached for her walking stick. All these girls swooning over my nephew. I hope you aren't one of them. I wouldn't be eligible, Your Highness, Cinderella said, swallowing the lump that suddenly formed in her throat. All because of some silly laws that my silly ancestors made. The world is changing, Cinder Girl, and anyone, I do repeat, anyone, can make something of herself if she puts her mind to it. Oh, to be young today. You think a servant could become a princess? My husband came from a family without wealth, but he was smart and practical. He was a shrewd businessman and become one of the richest men at Arules. Anybody can become anything, so long as they put their minds to it. She eyed Cinderella. Hard work and fortitude, Cinder Girl, is what will get you ahead, not swooning over my nephew. Cinderella hid a smile. Yes, Your Highness. Good. Besides, you wouldn't want him anyway. He's been so melancholy over that idiotic princess with the impractical shoes, he doesn't even know her name. Cinderella bit her lip and subconsciously reached out to rearrange the flowers before her. While it warmed her heart that the prince was still searching for her and had declared that he'd fallen in love with the girl he danced with at the ball, she couldn't forget how he hadn't recognized her outside the banquet hall. Her stepmother's words echoed in Cinderella's head. Look at yourself. You are nothing, an orphan and a servant. Who would want you? Certainly not His Royal Highness. I blame my brother for young Charles's romantic notions. George was always the sentimental sort, a believer in love at first sight. That would explain the ball. Genevieve sighed. Having Charles pick a bride in such a way, having all the women parade themselves about the palace. Love doesn't happen like that. Love takes time. George used to have more sense when the Queen was alive. What was the Queen like? Cinderella asked. She was as kind as she was beautiful. Far too good for my brother, Genevieve chuckled. Then her expression darkened. She died far too soon. The Duchess's voice trailed off, and she quickly composed herself. Anyhow, at this rate, the only way to find this mystery maiden of his would be to hold another ball. Cinderella pretended to study the flowers she'd arranged so she wouldn't have to meet the Duchess's eye. But that isn't going to happen, is it? Of course not, Genevieve made a face. Imagine holding another ball simply so Charles can find this glass slipper maiden. What a ludicrous idea. Though now that you mention it, I'd better talk some sense into George before he comes up with such an idea. Wish me luck. If we are all to have some peace in this castle, I will need it. Good luck, Cinderella said faintly. After the Duchess left, Cinderella sank onto the plush carpet. She'd gone from orphan and nobody in her stepmother's eyes to this glass slipper maiden in everyone else's. Who was she now? She was still a servant, I'll bet, one for the royal family, and she received wages for her work. It was a respectable job, one many would dream of, one she was proud of, and yet... I am not happy, she whispered. She said it again, louder this time. I haven't been happy, not in a long time. What a strange relief it was to finally admit that to herself. After years of wearing a smile for her stepmother and stepsisters, of pretending to be content to work in their household, lest Lady Tremaine kick her out into the streets, her heart couldn't heal itself over a mere week or two. It would take time. Meeting the prince had made her happy, but that happiness had been fleeting. She needed something real for herself, a purpose. Closing the Duchess's door softly behind her, she allowed herself a long exhale. She had something in mind. Chapter 13. Ferdinand, the Grand Duke of Malloy, straightened the scarlet sash draped over his torso and flicked a speck of dust off his sleeve. Given that this nonsensual search for the maiden with the glass slipper was all but finished, he hoped he could get the prince to listen to reason. Doubtful, but he would certainly try his best. The morning was slowly aging, bright white light filtering in from the palace's arched windows. After straightening his collar, Ferdinand turned to Charles's attendant, whose profile bore a striking resemblance to the young prince's. "What are you waiting for, squire? Announce me." The sure-footed young man marched to the side and knocked thrice on the prince's door before opening it. Then he cried, "Your Royal Highness, the Grand Duke." Ferdinand was surprised to find the prince leaning against a marble pillar, his face to the sun-filled window, reading some nonsensual philosophy book. Ferdinand couldn't make out the title occupying the royal's attention, but before Prince Charles had left the palace for his studies at the Royal University, he had spent most of his time avoiding his tutors and playing pranks on the staff. To see him absorbed in a scholarly book so early in the morning surprised Ferdinand and worried him. The prince's years away had changed him, his exposure to greater arulas clearly giving him ideas about how the monarchy needed to be changed. Ideas like welcoming commoners in the council, or rewarding merit over class, or taxing the nobles to distribute wealth among the poor. Ideas that Ferdinand knew he wouldn't agree with. "Ahem," began the Grand Duke. The prince flipped a page, absorbed in his book. A muscle twitched in Ferdinand's jaw. "These young people are so rude these days," he thought, "so easily distracted." Still the Duke made no motion that he was irritated, and instead plastered on a smile. Heaven knew that any ambitious man who wanted the king's ear needed to master schooling his features into an expression of placid obsequiousness, and by God, he had. Besides, he was aware the prince was frustrated with him for failing to find the maiden who could fit the glass slipper. Indeed, after he declared to the king that the search was futile and over, Charles's expression grew so lost and forlorn, Ferdinand could hardly imagine the youth as a suitable sovereign. Over the past three days, the prince had become obsessed with finding the girl. So obsessed that he ordered the cursed shoe encased in a glass box to be displayed outside the palace in case the girl should come riding by and see it one day. A ludicrous idea. Ferdinand had almost laughed aloud when he had heard it. The king's money was obviously better spent building defenses or encouraging relations with the neighboring kingdoms, but upon realizing the prince was serious, Ferdinand did not dare voice his opposition. He was too wise for that. Let the boy lose credit in the council's eyes. Let the council see, as Ferdinand did, that Charles was completely unsuited for the throne. In the meantime, the Grand Duke would orchestrate his own schemes, beginning with this morning's visit. He swept a bow. "Your Royal Highness, thank you for agreeing to this audience with me." "What is it?" said the prince, his gloom-ridden eyes only briefly flitting up from his book to meet the Grand Duke's. "Your Highness, I understand that you are disappointed in my service." Ferdinand's words tasted sour, so he lifted his tone to octave lest the ill flavor seep into his mouth. "I wish to apologize for failing to find the maiden with the glass slipper." "Apologize?" The prince's tone was harsh. "Somehow I doubt that's the only reason you're here." "Come, Your Highness. I realize you're distraught at me. Come, Your Highness. I realize you are distraught at me and at this entirely harrowing episode." Ferdinand's voice trailed off. Truth be told, it was most harrowing for him. Even now, days after his search had concluded, when he closed his eyes, all he could see were ladies' feet. All he could hear were the strident cries, "It's my slipper! It's my slipper!" Feet everywhere. It was the stuff of nightmares. Big feet, little feet, toes and heels, calluses and ankles. He broadened his smile. "Can we not let bygones be bygones?" His plea did little to soften the prince, but Charles at least put his book down. "What is it you want?" Ferdinand drew a breath, the deep sort he always took before saying something important, something that needed to be said without pause. Your father and I wanted to impress upon you a reminder that you are the crown prince, your highness, the only heir to our luminous kingdom. As such, it is your duty to consider marrying for the good of your country and your people. The prince pounded his fist on the table. I don't want to hear any more of this. But, your highness, Ferdinand persisted, it would please your father. He has been rather distraught lately, in private, so as not to worry you. Charles hesitated. Distraught over what? Aha! Now he had him. The Princess of Lords is quite a beauty, said Ferdinand instead, unrolling one of the silver portraits he had brought. And I hear the Princess of... Distraught over what? Interrupted Charles. Ferdinand, if you are using my father as a ploy for me to marry a girl of your choice... Sir, I would never... Then I'll hear it from my father himself. I do not need advice from you. This is an opportunity for you to serve your country, your highness, Ferdinand said soothingly. Our rule is not as strong as it once was. You must consider the future. I'll consider it when I hear it from my father's lips, not yours. Ferdinand's mouth clamped shut. When he spoke again, his voice was thin and tight. As you wish, your highness. Now, if you'll excuse me, understand when I've been dismissed. The Duke made a stiff bow, then stormed out of the room. These young people, he muttered, when the prince could not hear. They will be the country's ruin. They will be this country's ruin. His teeth gritted. Ferdinand continued down the palace halls, growing more agitated by the minute until he reached his offices. The first thing he did was pull up Dr. Costa's report on the king's health. There had been little change in His Majesty's well-being. He had made a full recovery from the rheumatism he suffered this past winter, and any variation in his health, such as his recent poor sleep, may be attributed to stress. I have taken into account your concern and suggestion that His Majesty reduce his activity. But your grace may be pleased to know that at this time it is not necessary for him to relinquish his appearances with the royal council. Rather, such stimulation may improve his condition. Ferdinand crumpled the note in his fist. Stress. What did these bumpkin physicians know? It was time for His Majesty to cease attending the council. King George had long since stopped adding any value to the meetings anyway, and now His Majesty refused to take tea with him after dinner. Who knew I'd sleep better without listening to you prattle on and on about policy? Go speak with Charles instead. He's been eager to become more involved with the council. Charles, indeed. The prince's return from university had thrown a wrench into Ferdinand's plan, painstakingly constructed over months and months. Now, if the king were to suddenly retire, Charles would be poised to take over, and given the prince's evident dislike for him, there was a good chance he would have Ferdinand stripped of his power as the king's most trusted adviser and confidant. That absolutely cannot happen, and he would see that it didn't. If nothing else, the Grand Duke was a man of carefully laid plans. His rise in court had been in part by the grace of his family's name, but it had also taken years of meticulous engineering and carefully made alliances for him to gain the respect of the royal council. He would have to accelerate his plan, but how would he go about it without drawing suspicion? His evening teas with the king had been perfect, allowing him to slowly erect the foundation for his scheme, but that was no longer an option. Besides, the time for action was upon him. Ferdinand drummed his fingers on the table. Recent poor sleep, the physician's note had said. Was it true that the king was taking a draught to aid his slumber? That could provide just the opportunity he needed. Genevieve's new girl had all but inadvertently revealed critical information. She takes a sleeping draught, the maiden had said, the same as the king. A sleeping draught was an unimportant revelation, one somebody else probably wouldn't have accepted from the girl as reasonable payment for installing her in the palace. But after years of careful observation within its confines, Ferdinand had learned that, more often than not, what seemed the most insignificant pieces of information could turn the tides in his favor. And he had a feeling that this one would play into into his hands favorably indeed. Chapter 14. Charles sighed, relieved when Ferdinand finally left. He had never liked the man, and since returning home from his studies, his dislike had only intensified. For the life of him, he could not understand why his father placed so much trust in the Grand Duke. Perhaps some things are meant to be mysteries, he thought wistfully, like the identity of the girl with the glass slipper. Charles balled his fist at his sides. He hated the possibility that Ferdinand might be right about the search being pointless. A quiet knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Your Highness," spoke his attendant, Pierre. "What is it?" "Your aunt, the Duchess, sir. She awaits your company in the south courtyard." Charles hadn't forgotten, but he had lost track of the time. He had been doing that often lately. "Please fetch my hat and my university jacket," he told Pierre. After a pause, he added, "On second thought, I'll bring them myself." His university jacket, as he called it, was an ill-fitting double-breasted coat he'd worn every day when away from the palace, and he loved it. It was the only garment he owned that did not have gold buttons or epaulettes or fabric so white it looked like it had taken an army of laundresses to press clean. It lay neatly folded on a wooden bench beside his writing desk, surrounded by 2 stacks of books precisely piled to obscure its location. He threaded his arm through each of the lightly frayed sleeves. To his amusement, the holes in its lining had been patched with scraps of silk, and its worn wool had been pressed and cleaned. At least he had managed to stop the seamstresses from replacing all the buttons or trying to hide the old tea and coffee stains. He'd won it from a classmate on a bet that he couldn't go 1 hour in town without being recognized as the crown prince of Arules. He made it 65 minutes before someone finally bowed. Now it was one of his most prized possessions, and he wore it whenever he wished to not be recognized, which, to be fair, was essentially all the time. Charles ignored Pierre's raised eyebrow and headed for the south courtyard. He had promised to take Aunt Genevieve for a ride through Valoris that morning, but he hadn't promised to give the tour as the crown prince. No, today he'd simply be Charles, her nephew. He had a feeling Aunt Genevieve would understand the way his father could not. That was why, when she had asked him to take her into the city, he couldn't refuse. Of all the royal coach houses' carriages, Charles commissioned the most ordinary one for the day's tour, the one he and his father took when they didn't want to draw attention on the road. It was plain as any merchant's coach, bearing no flag with his family's royal crest, and no coat of arms painted on the doors. Sure enough, Aunt Genevieve was already seated inside, her tiara sparkling in the wan morning light. She waved her fan when she saw him. "You seem to have inherited your father's punctuality," she said dryly. She looked him up and down, and the stable's hand's sense of fashion. "Good morning, Aunt Genevieve," the prince said in greeting. He darted a glance at the empty seat beside her. Part of him had almost hoped she'd brought her attendant so that he might have a second chance at meeting her. But his aunt was alone. Of course she was alone. So why had his heart skipped a beat in anticipation of possibly seeing that girl with the blue eyes again? Quickly he recovered himself and bowed. "My apologies, Aunt Genevieve. It seems I've kept you waiting again." The Duchess clicked her tongue. "It's becoming quite the habit with you, Charles. First my welcome lunch, now this. I have half a mind to go back inside and catch up on my sleep." She waited for her threat to sink in. Before Charles could respond, she continued, "Luckily, it's a beautiful morning for riding out into Valoris, and I've already dismissed my girl until lunch." Charles cocked his head slightly, tempted to ask where her attendant had gone. "Come on, get inside. The sun isn't getting any younger, and neither am I." With a smile, the prince obediently entered the carriage and signaled for the driver to take off. As the coach lurched to a start, his aunt grabbed the side of her seat and snapped her fan to close. "Tell me, was it your idea to fetch me in this gourd of a coach, or your father's?" "Mine, Aunt Genevieve. I thought we might see more of the city if we weren't recognized. If you are uncomfortable, we can change to a different coach." "No." To Charles's surprise, his aunt doffed her tiara, tossing it aside always scratches my head anyway. Besides, if you're going to be dressed like a commoner, I am certainly not going around looking like a duchess." Charles leaned back, hiding a smile. No wonder he always liked his aunt. "Look at you, my boy." Genevieve patted his shoulders. "Such a strapping young man. You must have gotten your good looks from your mother. Heaven knows they weren't from George." The prince laughed in spite of himself. "I've missed you, Aunt Genevieve." "I've missed you, too." The angles of her face softened as she considered her nephew. She inhaled. "Funny. I left the palace because I didn't want to live life strung up like a puppet, and now that I'm back, I lament not visiting more. I've missed too many years with my favorite nephew." "Last I recall, Aunt, I am your only nephew." The Duchess crossed her arms and gave him a stern look. "Much as I am fond of you, Charles, this tardiness is rather unbecoming of the future king." She raised her hand before he could explain. "I've heard from palace gossip that you're in a love-lorn state. Lovesickness is no excuse for discourtesy, do you understand?" "Yes, Aunt Genevieve, I'm sorry, truly. It's just that I feel lost, like I've met the one person who's meant for me, and she's vanished." At his confession, she softened further, her features melting into a smile that rounded on her cheeks and reminded him faintly of his father. "What's so special about this girl?" she asked, leaning slightly forward, her eyes taking on a mischievous sparkle. Inquiring minds wish to know. "Tell me about her, Charles." "You could have the hand of any lady in the kingdom, any lady in the world even. Why are you so set on this one? Rather rude of her to take off so suddenly." Charles hesitated, surprised but how relieved he was by his aunt's questioning. He hadn't talked about her to anyone, not about his feelings anyway. Maybe this was what he needed to help sort out his thoughts, to get out of this haze that had clouded his mind ever since the ball. "Any other girl would only want to marry me to become a princess," he replied finally. She didn't even know I was the prince." At that, Genevieve wrinkled her nose. "Plenty of ladies pretend to be ignorant, Charles. It's a coy game that they play. Not her," Charles insisted. "Not her." He tugged at one of the buttons sewn under the tufted cushion against his back. There was something so sincere about her, so kind. I didn't even get her name. I'm beginning to worry that she was nothing more than a dream. "Dreams don't leave behind glass slippers," said Genevieve sensibly. "For that matter, who would think to wear glass shoes, let alone to a ball?" "I told you," said the prince. "She's different." His aunt sighed. "You are hopeless, Charles. I see there's no talking you out of this, so let's talk about something else. I take it your studies went well." "Well enough," he replied absent-mindedly. "I did find it refreshing to study philosophy, history, and diplomacy instead of protocol and dancing." While his aunt chattered on about how her husband Arthur had been a lecturer once at the Royal University, Charles gazed out the window. On his way home a week ago, he marveled at how little his hometown had changed. The oak trees, the wide pastures skirting the countryside, the rows of brick houses and the estates inhabited by the minor nobles, the winding road to the palace, yet how different they seemed. He couldn't place his finger on it, but he saw more now. He noticed the people as well as the land. Surely what he had learned during his university courses had trained his mind to be that of a learned and knowledgeable king, but there was more to ruling than that. The prince signaled for the carriage to slow down. "What is it?" asked his aunt, startled by the apparent change in plan. Charles opened the door, escorting his aunt into the town. It was still early and no one paid him a second glance, but Genevieve was starting to get a few stares. They couldn't stay out long. "I spent most my entire childhood behind the palace walls. Going to the university was the first time I got to see the rest of the world." "What do you see?" As they turned the corner, winding down a curved path, Charles spoke softly. "Poverty. Our people starving. Orphans and beggars without anywhere to go." The prince reached into his trouser pockets and took out a gold coin. "I see it in the capital now, too. I never noticed it before." He placed the gold coin by a sleeping mother and child, wishing he'd thought to bring food as well. But it would have to do. It was only a start. Once he gained his father's confidence, he would do more, much more. When they returned to the carriage, his aunt watched him thoughtfully. Going away did change you. I heard rumors, Aunt Genevieve, that your husband cared deeply about improving conditions for the poor, that my father sent him away for it. Why? Why would he do that? That wasn't the reason your father sent him away, said Genevieve abruptly. I don't want to talk about it. It's better left in the past. Forgive me, Aunt. If anyone should be seeking my forgiveness, it's Ferdinand, not you. When she wouldn't elaborate, Charles gently changed the subject. The Grand Duke isn't exactly in my good graces either. He wants me to marry the Princess of Lourdes. I would consider it if I truly thought we were in danger of war, but I fear his real motive is to expand Allura's power to Lourdes. Charles continued, My father and I should be looking to improve this country for our people, not enlarging our territory. Times are changing. While I was at school, I would slip into town occasionally, unnoticed, and observe the people. How it surprised me to see them unhappy, some of them barely able to afford a roof over their heads, others begging on the streets. There were riots, too, riots against the nobility that Ferdinand denies ever happened. If the council won't address the problem arising within our own country, then I must. What would you do about it? Genevieve asked. What would you do about it? Said Genevieve quietly. That's the difficult part, is it not? Confessed the prince. I'll make enemies of powerful men like the Grand Duke, and the people will dislike me by nature for being the head of the regime that oppresses them. But I want to help them. Truly I do. Your father and mother were blessed to have you as a son, Genevieve said. They tried for many years to have a child, you know. 3 brothers and 2 sisters had died before him. Charles had never met any of his siblings, and the physicians had pleaded with his mother not to try for a 6th child, citing her health and her age. She had persevered, but in giving birth to Charles, her health had suffered. A familiar wave of guilt overcame Charles, and he turned to the window, sucking in a gulp of air. His aunt touched his arm. Your father only wants the best for you. He doesn't want you to be alone. I understand, but I just returned home. I don't know why he's in such a rush for me to marry. Genevieve hesitated. Then she drew the windows close and lowered her voice. George plans to abdicate. The confession sent a jolt through the young prince. He blinked back his surprise. What? I've already said more than I should have. He will tell you himself when the time is right. She frowned. Best to keep this to yourself, Charles. I don't trust the Grand Duke. Lord knows what he'd do with this information. The transference of the crown has always brought about a period of uncertainty and unrest. It wouldn't be above the Duke to take advantage of that and rally the lords to take more power for himself. I would dismiss him before that ever happened. It wouldn't be that easy. Ferdinand has great influence. The nobility trust and revere him. He's a manipulator. Every time I try to tell father so, he won't believe me. You must not blame your father. Ferdinand has been his friend longer than you've been alive. 40 years of ruling will exhaust any man, and the Grand Duke has taken advantage of that. Genevieve's expression turned grim. The point is, you must surround yourself with people you trust. I trust you, Aunt Genevieve. I'm even older than your father, she said gravely. Neither of us will be here forever. Charles perched his arm on the carriage door and looked to the horizon, punishing himself with a glance at the sun. He blinked away the sting in his eyes. You're right, but I worry that I'm not ready. I worry I'll never be ready. What does your heart tell you? I don't know. Don't know? She paused, and when she next spoke, her tone was gentler. I heard you promise to marry the girl who fit this so-called glass slipper. A rather rash declaration, was it not, Charles? The prince sighed. Father and Ferdinand wrote the proclamation. I didn't have a choice. Besides, what was I supposed to do, Aunt Genevieve? Let her go? I'm not trying to lecture you, but any girl could have fit that shoe. Any girl. I wouldn't care whether she were a princess or a scullery maid, Charles said fiercely. He already knew that the Grand Duke's opinion, and he didn't need a second person haranguing him that the girl he'd fallen in love with could be a mere commoner. That is not what I meant, Genevieve clicked her tongue, deliberating over how to explain. Fitting a glass slipper is not a sign of character or of compatibility. Sure, you must know every eligible maiden in the kingdom dreams of marrying you. A girl might cut off her toes simply to fit the glass slipper. Making a promise like that could have doomed you to a union with someone you didn't love. Someone just pretending to be the girl you met. I see what you mean, Aunt Genevieve. Charles bowed his head. That was Father's idea, but I agreed to it. It was foolish of me. I understand that now. Love has a way of addling our wits, Genevieve tilted her head. You take after your father in that regard. He was very much in love with your mother, you know. She wasn't a commoner, yet she was certainly on the diminutive end of minor nobility. My parents didn't approve of the match, but George raised all hell to be with her. I didn't know. To this day, your father is a romantic. Genevieve gave a tight smile. Funny, until then, my parents always considered me the rebellious one. Charles had heard stories about his aunt when she was young, how she once stole his father's trousers and traipsed across the royal lawn in them, an act that had distressed his grandmother so much that she nearly had a stroke. How she'd once made a slingshot out of a gold necklace and shot pearls at her tutor for suggesting she wasn't as bright as the future king. Since her last visit, his father rarely spoke of her, but when he did, it was always with a sort of bittersweet sadness. The prince didn't know what had passed between the king and his sister, and he didn't dare ask. Were you unhappy, Aunt Genevieve? No. On the contrary, I liked my husband very much, but I married him for a chance to get away from the palace and all this. She gestured at the tiara she tossed to her side. I married him for freedom, for a chance not to have my life laid out for me. Few kings and queens have had the luxury of marrying for love. You are lucky your father is giving you that chance. I know. Then, the young prince's brow nodded and he clutched the side of the carriage door. It's like she vanished completely, as if she never existed. No one knows who she is, and no one's ever seen her before. It is strange that she will not come forward, Genevieve allowed. You said she didn't know you were the prince? Charles thought back to that night, remembering how, moments before she took off, she exclaimed that she hadn't met the prince. Yes, and she vanished soon after I tried to tell her. I'm sure she knows by now, Genevieve responded. I'm sure she knows by now. Genevieve reopened her fan and batted it at herself. Perhaps we should have another ball. Please, Aunt Genevieve, be serious. I do not usually enjoy such spectacles myself. Heaven knows they're a tremendous waste of money and time. She paused. But something your father does have a spark of wisdom in him. But sometimes your father does have a spark of wisdom in him. The last ball was to open every eligible maiden in the kingdom. Do you understand the importance of that, Charles? I hadn't thought about that, he admitted. Not until recently. Ferdinand must have not been pleased about that, I can assure you. The villagers have few opportunities to mingle with nobility. Men like Ferdinand do not allow it. She let out a resigned sigh. Another ball may well be the solution. Maybe your girl will make another appearance. I doubt it. I fear she vanished for good. People don't just vanish, said the Duchess. Mark my words. If she has any sense in her at all, she'll be at the ball. And if you have any sense in you at all, you should make sure she's the right one for you. Not just because she fits a silly slipper. We'll make it a masquerade. I'm afraid I'm not following. Why a masquerade? Genevieve clasped her hands. Because, my dear nephew, even if this girl is as wonderful and kind and as beautiful as you say, I want you to be sure you're in love with her and not a pretty face. What do you say? What choice do I have? Said the prince with a sigh. But he managed to smile at his aunt. My father did always say you were wiser than he. Did he now? Genevieve said with a twinkle in her eye. That just may be the smartest thing he's ever said. I'll be sure to remind him of that. She opened the window of the carriage to wave outside at the people. Besides, your father hasn't officially welcomed me back to court. He owes me a party. Won't he be suspicious given you hate parties, Aunt Genevieve? I wouldn't count on your father remembering that. In any case, it would be nice to be presented before the court again to remind my old enemies that I am still well and alive. Bemused, Charles shook his head at his aunt. Then I'll do it, but only to welcome you to the kingdom. It's been so many years since I've seen you. Oh, good. It's rather gauche to suggest a ball be held in one's honor, but I'll have a word with your father. I used to be quite good at making him think my ideas were his own. You'll see. That girl of yours will be there too. I'm sure of it. Charles hoped she was right. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop there, guys. So we'll start on chapter 15. We're almost halfway through the book. I hope you guys are enjoying it. Once again, I know I'm not the best narrator. I make errors on my words. Some words I've never seen before and don't quite know how to pronounce them, but I do my best, and I hope you're enjoying it so far. And it wasn't much of a cliffhanger to keep you guys holding on there, but it really is a good book. I have read this one already, and you guys will really enjoy it. It gets deeper into what's going on behind the Duke, what his plans are. Even if some seem really obvious at the moment, there's always a little twist. But the ending is pretty cool too. So